In this episode of the How to Do Your 20s podcast, I'm going to be talking with Cliff Ravenscraft from Podcast Answer Man. And we're going to be talking about two things. We're going to talk about podcasting and how to create, market, and sell courses. And Cliff is the guy that knows everything about podcasting. He's the answer man. So Cliff, first off, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Travis. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So the first question I have to ask is, how did you get into podcasting? What is the story on how you became so knowledgeable about this?
Well, I started out podcasting as a hobby. I had discovered podcasting, I believe it was the summer of 2005, and I was just a consumer of content first, and there was plenty of it out there that I loved. It was so awesome to have this idea that you could take talk radio, if you will, and actually find content that you enjoy. I mean, if you turned on the radio dials, it was news, sports, or politics, and I really didn't have a keen interest in any of those things. So to think that I could hear people talk about geeky technology stuff, Apple, Mac, all the other different social media platforms, and then to think that I could find all these faith-based programs and I could listen to them when I want, wherever I want, it was just incredible. And so I fell in love with podcasting right away. Now, my wife was watching this television show called Lost. Did you ever watch that show?
Yeah, I watched a few episodes, yeah.
All right, so my wife was watching this television show Lost, and I couldn't understand why she would want to watch it, but she was. And at the end of the first season, I sat down on the couch with my laptop just waiting for her to be finished with her obsession. And as I was sitting there, it was like the fourth to the last episode in the first season, and I got hooked. I could not believe just how incredibly engaging this show was. And so I started to do some search on it. This is back in 2005, so it wasn't easy to get episodes, and there wasn't a legal way to get them, but I knew that I needed to watch the first season of Lost. And so being the tech geek that I was, I found a way to do so. And I found that there was this whole online community. There were millions of people around the world watching Lost, but it was primarily an American television show. People around the world who were downloading this show, much in the same way that I was, and everybody was talking about it all together. And not only that, but the writers also had an online forum that was official. The producers of the show created it. They had the actors and everybody involved in this online forum. No television show had ever done this before. They even created fake websites like Oceanic.com and a fake airline and a fake Hanzo Foundation and all these other things, and all of this just to kind of give hidden clues and Easter eggs and stuff. And I'm like, this is incredible. And people were eating it up. And what I found was that first of all, I wonder if there's any podcast about this. And there were 5 of them. Now, this is back in 2005. There wasn't a lot of podcasts about anything back then, but there were 5 podcasts devoted to the TV show Lost. I subscribed to all of them and listened to every episode every week. And what happened was I started blogging about Lost, and I recorded a 3.5-minute audio piece of feedback sharing a theory that I had blogged about. And I sent that into one of my favorite podcasts, and they played my audio in their show. Now, that actually got broadcast out to more than 70,000 people around the world.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, my voice just got heard by 70+ thousand people around the world. This is incredible. My blog traffic went through the roof. Entertainment Weekly, or EW.com, did an entire feature on my theory from my blog. It was the most incredible thing. And then somebody says, Cliff, I heard your 3.5 minutes. Dude, you should do your own podcast. And, well, it didn't take a lot to stroke my ego. And so that's how it all got started. I decided to start my own podcast. I spent about $35 in equipment. And in the second episode, I asked my wife if she wanted to join me. And my wife and I have been podcasting now for the past 10.5 years. And since December 2005, I've done 30 different podcast shows about 30 different topics. And I've done over 3,600 podcast episodes, most of them about an hour or more.
Wow. Okay, so I want to dive into some questions about this. Let's say someone already knows the technical aspects. They know to buy the microphone and how to record all the calls, and they're getting ready to launch a podcast. How do you make sure when you're launching your podcast it has a strong start? Do you have any tips for that?
Well, it depends on what you mean by a strong start. It's different. One of the first places that I go with anybody who's getting ready to launch a podcast, my first question is, why do you want to create this podcast? So, for example, Travis, one of the things that I think of is like there. Could you think it's possible to have an extremely successful podcast that you do? Let's just say you do a podcast for 2 years, and at the end of the 2 years, you've got 5 people who are downloading the show every single week. Could that be successful?
I guess it could be if the 5 people. It depends what you want. I see what you're saying.
See,
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So what if I wanted to create a podcast? Let's just say that I'm really into. Just throw out a topic, any topic.
DIY. You're really
okay. I'm into
DIY.
DIY. Yeah. What if I wanted to create a podcast so that it would allow me to talk to those guys called what are those brothers on the DIY network? The twin guys. My mom's in love with them. I can't remember them, but they're the 2 guys. One wears a suit all the time. But what if there's the girl who's the rehab addict, right? There's all these celebrities on Do It Yourself, Bob Vila and all these other guys. What if my main goal was to create a podcast where I could take an interview and actually get a 30-minute or a 45-minute interview once a week, every week, with some of the greatest minds in the field of DIY? Wow, if I'm really into DIY and I had a blog about it and I wanted to create a podcast and I just wanted to be able to talk to those guys, where if I was just to say, hey, I'm in your area, can I take you out to lunch? The chances of me getting that, maybe 1 in 1,000. Mm-hmm. If I have a podcast and I reach out and say, I have a podcast and I've been doing this for the last 12 months, can I interview you for my show? I'd love to just share your area of expertise on my podcast. And here's the interesting thing. When you ask somebody onto your podcast, and I've done a couple, I can tell you right now, people do not ask you, for the most part, maybe 1 out of 1,000 will ask you, or most people do not ask you, how many subscribers do you have? Mm-hmm. And the first thing they'll say is like, oh, you have a podcast? And what's the topic? What's the niche focus? Oh, dude, I'd love to have that exposure on your show. And so almost out of the gate, people say yes, and it gives you the opportunity to connect with those people. And the interesting thing is that if I'm trying to build a name for myself or a brand for myself, the fact that I'm having these conversations with some of these big people that we all kind of look up to, there's some kind of credibility by association just by the fact that I'm actually consistently having these conversations. And so even if I had a very small audience over 2 years, but man, over the past 2 years, each week I've talked to the best of the people in my industry. Because I have a podcast, it gave me that opportunity. And even if I had very few subscribers, the knowledge and wisdom I'm going to gain from actually networking and talking to those people, that alone would make it successful for me.
I completely agree. Actually, I say that a lot to people. Why I have my podcast is it's as much as it is to reach out to listeners and like encourage them to live their 20s to the best of their possibility. It's also for me a little self-serving. I want to talk to really interesting people. I want to have fun conversations, which that actually kind of leads me to another question I have. And you're 100% right. Like I've emailed a lot of people, and I'm surprised on the high caliber of guests like yourself that I can get on this show without them even asking how many listeners.
Did I ask you how many? Did I ask you how many listeners?
Yeah, no,
I don't care.
Very few. I think I've had one person out of the 100 plus people I've asked to come on the show ask me about that. But still, I think and maybe it's just an insecurity on my part. Do you have any recommendations on how to reach out to those people that seem almost out of your league, high caliber guests? Obviously a well-crafted email, but yeah.
Change your mindset. They're not high caliber people. They're just like you and I. They don't have special pants. They put them on the same way. And you might think that some of these people are hard to reach. They got gatekeepers. Here's the deal. I started out with the Lost podcast, right? Mm-hmm. I have celebrities on my show. Now, the interesting thing is we're talking about actors who are paid millions of dollars. They were listening to my podcast and calling my voicemail feedback hotline just like any other listener to my podcast. That's what we had going on. So these people are just ordinary, everyday, average people just like us. Now, some of them, they let their fame and stuff go to their head. And yeah, they're going to be some of those people who think they're just too good for you. And how do you reach those people? I don't know. But here's the interesting thing. Number one, don't think of yourself as so lowly. You're not a peon in the mindset of these big, huge people. The other thing is think about the value that you have to offer to them. Now, chances are you have more than 5 subscribers, right? And so the fact that you are allowing me to be a guest on your show, I trust that you have been working hard on this show. I trust that you have a valuable audience that has come to know, like, and trust you. And the fact that they're listening to you week after week after week, that communicates to me that these people value and trust what you bring to them, what value you bring to them, and they know that you wouldn't invite me onto the show unless you felt that I had value to offer as well. And so the fact that you've even invited me as a guest on your show communicates to your audience that Cliff Ravenscraft is somebody you might want to check out. And that is hugely valuable to me. And I don't care if it's 10,000 people or if it's 50 people. If you only had 50 people download this episode, those 50 people know that you chose me as a guest on your show. And that's extremely valuable to me. And believe it or not, that's extremely valuable to anybody who wants anything as far as a message to get out or a product to be promoted or a book to be promoted or anything else for that matter. So how do you reach out to those people? Sure, a carefully crafted email, blah, blah, blah. That's the first place you can start. There's this thing called the telephone. Pick up the phone and first of all, Google them. You could probably Google just about anybody and get their phone number. And why not place a phone call and cold call a couple of these people? That'll shock them. And at least it'll show them that you're a little bit more than the average person and that you're willing to go out of your way to do some things. Find out where they live and where they work, where they eat coffee, drink coffee, or whatever the case may be. Stalk them a little bit and send them a gift. Matter of fact, interesting thing. I just heard an interview. I just listened to the latest episode of the Ray Edwards podcast today. And he let it slip out where he and his son go to drink coffee, where they buy their coffee from. When they're, each morning they go out and go to coffee. They don't go to Starbucks. They drink this special kind of coffee. I think it's called Nitro coffee. But Nitro isn't a brand. It's it's a style of coffee you get from your local brewery or whatever. And they mentioned the coffee shop that they're at. And they kind of joked around about something. But here's the deal. If I want to, I could take that information. Man, if I wanted to really get in good with Ray, I would actually, they said the name of the place. I know that he lives in Spokane, Washington. I would look up the name of that coffee shop in Spokane, Washington. I would talk to the manager of that store and say, there's a guy that comes in. This is what he looks like. His name is Ray Edwards, his son. This is what he looks like. He comes in on a daily basis. Do you know who that is? Oh, yeah, we see him every single day. Ray's a great guy. I would like to create a prepaid account for him, and I would like to go ahead and put $200 in it. Can I do that? Absolutely. And I'd send him put a prepaid account of $200 on there. Now, the next time he goes in, he hears about that, and you send him a little note in the mail that says, hey, just want to let you know I've taken care of your coffee for the next 6 months. Mm-hmm. It's on me. Hey, I'm not looking for you to do anything for me in return, but I do have a podcast, and if you ever have any free time, sure, I'd love to have you as a guest. But anyway, regardless of whether or not you say yes or not, enjoy the coffee. I know it means a lot to you. What do you think that would do?
I think that would make him very interested, want to come on the podcast, very interested in who this person is.
Do you think that might work for just about anybody out there?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's really – so another question for you is obviously with, I think you said 3,600 podcast episodes, you've probably interviewed a few people that at the time you thought were out of your league. Is there anyone in particular – not out of your – someone that was like almost unreachable. Is there anyone in particular that comes to mind?
Oh, sure. Gosh. First of all, the first person that introduced me to the world of podcasting was Leo Laporte. Have you ever heard of a guy named Leo Laporte?
I've heard the name, yes.
Okay, so you've heard the name. So for me, I grew up watching, when I was a teenager, I'm watching this show called, this TV network called Tech TV. And there's a show called The Screensavers and Call for Help. And Leo Laporte was on this show talking about technology every week. It's a cable television network. And millions of people watching this. And eventually, over the course of several years, he ends up leaving that. And he does this radio show, and then he starts a podcast. And now today, he's got a podcast with literally hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Wow. If I had to guess, probably about 700, 800,000 subscribers to his podcast. Wow. All right. Now, when I started podcasting, I'm just this guy in Northern Kentucky in his basement. Who am I? But it became my goal to finally get to the place. Matter of fact, I made it a goal that, number one, I wanted to meet Leo Laporte face-to-face. And number two, I wanted the opportunity to interview him for my podcast. And if I'm going really far, stretching it way out, I would love to actually be on one of his shows on his network because he broadcasts live. Those were my three dreams. Those are my three goals. And the same day that I said that, I also said, there's this guy, his name is Dan Miller. He wrote a book called 48 Days to the Work You Love. Now, I heard about Dan Miller from Dave Ramsey. Now, Dave Ramsey talked about Dan Miller all the time. 48 Days to the Work You Love. He sold millions of copies of this book. He also had a podcast. His message radically changed my life. So Leo Laporte introduces me to the world of podcasting, which, as you can tell, has changed my life. There's 48 Days to the Work You Love. This book has radically changed my life. So in one day, I said to my podcast audience, I said, guys, I've just finished reading a book that talks about how to achieve your goals. At number one, it says you have to believe that it's possible. Number two, it says that you need to write your goals down. And the third step in achieving your goal, achieving any goal, is to tell other people about the goal that you've set. And so I want to let you know my top two goals right now. I want to meet and interview Leo Laporte, and I would love to be a guest on his network. And number two, I want to meet and I want to interview Dan Miller. Now, 40 minutes after I published that episode, I got an email from a guy named Andy Traub. Says, Cliff, I've been listening to your podcast for months. Love your show. I'm close personal friends with Dan Miller. He has his podcast, and in fact, people are always asking him how they can actually launch a podcast just like his. He's heard nothing but amazing things about you. He would love to be a guest on your show. Would you like to have him next week? So I didn't even have to reach out to him. All I had to do is put it out there that I'm interested. And so if you go to podcastanswerman.com/Dan Miller, that very next week, that podcast happened. Now, some other interesting things happened from that story that I won't go into here unless you dig it out of me. But the next thing I will tell you is that a couple months later, or actually it was about a year and a half later, I had an opportunity to go to Los Angeles to speak at a conference. Now, Los Angeles is it may not seem to everyone else, but it seemed to me that's pretty close to San Francisco. It is for me, being that I'm coming from the East Coast going all the way to the West Coast, and I'm figuring, wait a second, I know that that Tech TV was filmed in San Francisco. I know that Leo Laporte is now in Petaluma, California. I did a Google search, and I'm like, okay, if I was to get to San Francisco, I could rent a car and drive to Petaluma. So the conference was paying for my airfare for me to do return airfare from Cincinnati all the way to Los Angeles. And I said, listen, guys, I appreciate that you're going to do this. Can you actually book my flight to where I fly into Los Angeles, but fly me home from San Francisco? And they said, well, how are you going to get from LA to San Francisco? I said, don't worry about that. I'll take care of it. Mm-hmm. I'll find a way. So I booked myself a separate flight to just go from LA to San Francisco. I rent a car and I drive up to Petaluma and I meet Leo Laporte. Now the interesting thing is I had not told him that I was coming. I had not told him I'd like to interview him or anything. I walk in and get this. He says, Cliff Ravenscraft, you're the podcast answer man. And I'm like, what? You know who I am? He goes, of course I know who you are. I talk about you on my radio show all the time. And so had the greatest time. He goes, do you want to do an interview? I mean, I've got some free time. And I did an interview. Now, here's the interesting thing. He broadcast live on his network. My interview of me interviewing him was broadcast live on his network. Wow. And then I ended up being a guest at the very end of one of his most important and most widely viewed shows called This Week in Tech. But anyway, my interview, by the way, with Leo Laporte, podcastanswerman.com/Leo, Leo, interview, all one word. So none of these people are out of our reach.
Wow. Those are great stories. All right. Definitely makes me want to, well, I asked for two reasons. One, for myself, to remind myself exactly what you're saying. But two, for the listeners, because I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, oh, I want to start a podcast. You know, I'll do it in a few months. I'll do it whenever. And I'm like, no, start now. I'm sure you can get, I'll be your first guest. So anyone listening to this, I will be your first guest if you want to start a podcast, and I'm sure you can easily reach out to a lot of other people that you think are quote unquote out of your league, and it's not as hard as you think.
Yeah, and by the way, when you are just starting out, I mean, the question that you might get more than how many people do you have subscribed to your show, are there going to be some people who will ask you that? Yeah. More than anything, it's like, well, how many episodes do you have? And a lot of people are concerned because podcasting is getting so popular. A lot of people are creating podcasts. And the reality, this is just a fact. This is a statistic that has not changed since 2005. And that is that I think it's like 80% of all podcasts that are created, 80% of podcasts that are launched never make it past their 7th episode.
Oh,
And
wow.
so there are a lot of people that say, well, tell me, how many podcast episodes do you have? And there are people like you that say, I'd be happy to be your first guest.
Mhm.
Now, I've gotten to the place where, because of the number of people who want to interview me in a podcast, I have quite a waiting list. And I am apprehensive about being somebody's first 10 guests, because that, the reality is it's a lot of time, effort, and energy on my part to do an interview. And if they're not going to stick with it for more than 10 weeks, then they're really not building an audience. They're really not into, I mean, it's sometimes you do need to prove yourself a little bit. And so another thing that I want to recommend for those who are thinking, I want to get into a podcast and I love this idea of interviewing and stuff like that, the first thing I want to encourage you to do is consider the idea of not doing or putting yourself in a box called interview format podcast. Allow yourself to have the freedom to do a solo episode, have a co-host come in and talk with you every now and then, maybe bring a panel of guests to talk about a subject where you get a bunch of experts together, and just get to the place where you knock out 10, 15, 20 episodes and then start bringing your guests in.
Yeah, that's actually, I've even gone the other way in a sense, where I started out just doing interviewing, and now sometimes I'll do a solo episode, or sometimes it'll be me and a buddy talking about a certain topic. And it helps because sometimes it is hard to get guests, or sometimes people flake on you, and it's good to have both sides of the coin.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I also agree with there has been times where people have approached me to do an episode, especially when it's people that I know are a little flaky. I'm like, why don't you get a few going, and then we'll do one. And then sure enough, a month or two later, they still haven't gotten the podcast started.
I'm at the place right now. I'm doing 25 podcast interviews in 2 weeks right now. So I'm in the middle of a 2-week run of doing podcast interviews. I have about 75 people on my waiting list that have invited me to be a guest on their show over the course of the last 4 months. And it's funny because I email all of these people. I say, boom, boom, boom. I'm ready. First come, first serve. You got that email, right?
Mm-hmm.
First come, first serve. Click here, and if you get one of the 25 spots, it's yours. And I think out of all of those people, I think I got 35 permanent failure responses that says this because the domain that they used for their website, they let the thing renew. They let it lapse. They're like, you know what? I'm not even podcasting anymore.
Wow. So the next thing I want to talk about is, so you have a course coming out, Podcasting A to Z. And first off, I want to talk about how you set up the course. This is something I'm really interested in because I released a course. I have another podcast where I talk about e-commerce. I released a course for that. And it was my first time doing a course. It was kind of rough around the edges. So I'm curious, as someone that's a little bit more seasoned, how is your course set up, basically?
Well, my course, I think, is probably one of the most unique courses out there. And of course, anybody's going to say that, right? However, I would invite anyone to tell me about anyone else who has done a course where they've had 596 people go through the course and have a 100% satisfaction rating. Not a single refund ever requested. Now, my course is more of an online group training program is what it is. And let me explain to you how it started. So back in the early days, I was doing one-on-one coaching and consulting. And at the time I was making $300 per hour. So to talk to me on the phone, to talk about podcasting, $300 for 1 hour, that's what it would cost you. And I had a couple clients booked for one day where I had 2 clients in the morning. I broke for lunch, and I did 2 clients in the afternoon. Each of those 4 clients this one day, I think this was back in August or September 2010, each of those clients requested 2 of my hours. So they prepaid for 2 hours. So they paid $600 for 2 hours. Now, I got onto the first call, had no idea what they wanted to talk to me about, but the first client says, Cliff, I'm ready to start recording and editing my show. I purchased Adobe Audition. Can you teach me how to use it? And so I got on to GoToMeeting. I'm doing screen capture or screen sharing, and I'm showing them step by step. This is the user interface. This is the recording, the editing window. This is how you can move and copy and paste. This is how you edit out mistakes. This is how you fix the audio volume levels and all these other things. And they're like, wow, this is incredible. And you know what? they're taking notes, because this is back in 2010. There's, the video recording, screen capturing stuff that we have available today wasn't as readily available back then. And so they didn't have any recording of our call. All they had was the notes from what they took. It's like, well, this is perfect. And they were loving it. Client just paid me $600 for 2 hours to just show them how to do something I do every single day. And so I got off the call, the second call. Cliff, I wanted to have you teach me Adobe Audition. I've never used this software before. I'm like, okay. And so I started over from the beginning. I went to lunch, and I'm not kidding you. The third and the fourth call that afternoon, they both wanted to learn how to use Adobe Audition. After that day, it didn't matter how much you paid me. I was sick and tired of teaching people how to do Adobe Audition. I was bored to tears because my real heart is actually helping people change people's lives through podcasts. It's like, that's the real thing. I want you to create content that's going to make a powerful and positive impact in people's lives. And sure, teaching you how to use Adobe Audition is doing that. But man, I really like to talk about how you build relationships and all this other stuff. And here they want me to show them the user interface and the basics of this stuff. And I'm not complaining. I made lots of money that day and each day that I continue to do this stuff. But I was getting bored of doing the same thing, teaching the same thing over and over again. So I got this idea. What if I did a webinar? Now, I was one of those crazy people. I did not start my mailing list until 2010. I started my mailing list in October 2010. Now, what happened was in January 2008 is when I launched my business. So it was years before I started my mailing list. So in October 2010, I start this mailing list, and I have 200 people on it. And I was just back to back getting all these people who wanted to learn Adobe Audition, Audacity, all the equipment, mixer basics, all of this stuff. How do you do a Skype mix minus? All of that stuff. And I just occurred to me, what if I created webinars where I would teach everybody what I just did for 2 hours with these clients? What if I did it as a webinar and had 150 or 200 people on it? And instead of charging them $600, what if I charged them $100 a piece? You get it for 1/5 the price, and not only that, but I'm going to record the video. It'll be high quality HD video, and you can watch it over and over again. Now, how much would you pay?
Yeah.
And so what I did, I only had 200 people on my mailing list. And so I sent my first email to my 200 people on my mailing list and said, guys, I'm going to do the Podcast Answer Man Boot Camp webinar series. And I'm going to take the top 7 topics that people hire me for to teach them how to do. I'm going to do them in 7 individual webinars. There'll be an Adobe Audition 101, Audacity 101, GarageBand 101, how to use all of this equipment. I'm going to do all of these 7 topics. And people normally, each of them will be about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And people normally would pay $600 for any one of these. You're going to pay $100 a piece. Or if you pay for all 7 of them, I'll give them to you for $595. I sent that first email out to 200 people. I made $16,000 in 10 days.
Wow.
I hadn't yet created any of the tutorials yet. And so that's how this got started. And then I scheduled the webinars 1 week apart from each other. They gave me 40 hours of working week to prepare the outline of those. Now, I didn't prepare anything for the 2 hours that I spent with each of those 4 individuals that day. You see, this is stuff that I just knew. I mean, this is stuff I'm doing every single day. But now I'm actually going to prepare. Now I'm going to spend 40 hours preparing for exactly how I'm going to teach you this step by step by step. So what these people were getting for $100 was 10 times more valuable than what people were paying $600 for. And the people who paid $600, trust me, they were super happy with what they got.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm way over delivering on what I'm offering here, and it went hugely successful. And by the way, I sold probably about $1.5 million in those digital tutorials since 2010.
Wow.
Last night I slept 5.5 hours, and while I was sleeping, I made over $1,000. So they just continue to sell, and that was in 2010. Of course, they've been updated a couple times since then. Now, when we go back to March 2011, that's when Podcasting A to Z, this course began. I was getting ready to go on a cruise. Dan Miller, remember that guy's name?
Mm-hmm.
Dan Miller says, Cliff, I'm hosting a cruise for my community, and I'd like to know if you'd like to come and speak about your area of expertise as a guest on my conference that I'm hosting on this cruise. I'm in.
Yeah.
All right. It is a 10-day cruise. And not only that, but there's 2 days before, 2 days afterwards. And so I need to figure out, most of my income was still one-on-one coaching consulting. I'm like, dude, I'm going to be gone from my business for 2 weeks. That's 2 weeks without any one-on-one consulting income. How am I going to pay for this? And I calculated that the actual cost of everything is going to be about $16,000. And so I'm like, how do I come up with $16,000? And I went to my mastermind group and they said, you thought about doing an online course where 20 people pay you $800 a piece? And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. What could I offer for $800 that 20 people would pay me for? And they said, well, don't you have all the tutorials? And I'm like, yeah. He says, well, why don't you just package all those together and then give that to them for, or not for actually 20 people for $800 is what I wanted. Why don't you sell all of those for $800? And I said, well, the problem is that, and they said you could package this thing and you could give them everything they need from A to Z. And that's where the term podcasting A to Z came from. And I'm like, well, the thing is that I have all these tutorials, but it's not everything's there. There's still little bits and pieces of tutorials that I haven't created. They said, well, you can create those over time and you can give people direct access to you so they can ask all the questions. You can fill in the gaps. Just give them a discussion forum and they can ask you anything that they want, and you could do it that way. And so that's how Podcasting A to Z started. I gave them access to all my tutorials. I created a weekly course outline, gave them assignments. Go watch this. If you have any questions, let me know. Go watch this. If you have any questions, let me know. And I'd walk them through the process. By the end of the 4 weeks, you will have a podcast. And so I went on this cruise. I literally sent out my email to my list right before I left for the trip for the cruise, and I signed my 20th student up the day the course launched when I got back. So I made my $16,000. It was an incredible experience teaching people in this way. It's like, wow, if I could do this instead of one-on-one coaching and consulting, I would. And so I did that in March, and then I ended up doing one in May of 2011. I did one in July. I did one in September, and I did one in December. And I've been doing about 4 to 6 of these a year. About a year and a half into it, I decided to really upgrade all of the things that I was doing inside of it, all the tutorials. I wanted to give people unlimited access to me. I wanted to really pour myself in, limit the number of students. And I raised the cost of the course to $2,000. And since then, I thought that what would happen was once I raised it to $2,000 from $800, I thought that I would sell half as many spots in it, and that would be okay because I'd still make the same amount of money. That did not happen. I increased the price from $800 to $2,000, and the number of students actually went up. So on average, when I was $800, on average, I had 20 students because I limited it to 20. I was expecting to go down to 10, but when it went to 2,000, I averaged between 30 to 35 students.
Wow.
And so you take $2,000 times 35 students, that is a significant increase in my income. And that's how Podcasting A to Z got started. That's a long answer to that question.
So just if I'm a student going through it, is there 7? You said 7 sections? Is that correct? Or
there was originally 7 tutorials. Today there's tons of tutorials that are included in this course. But it's a 4-week program, and basically I start you off. The idea here is that you have no idea. Many people there's some housewives that literally don't know how to attach a photo to an email, and I assume everybody starts there, and by the end of the 4 weeks, you actually have a podcast in iTunes that you are recording yourself, editing yourself, and publishing yourself, and you know how to do it all with full confidence. And of course, if you're any more technically advanced than somebody that doesn't know how to put a photo to an email, then chances are it's going to be even a little bit easier for you.
And you said they have access to you as well. So does that mean they can email you with questions, or how does that work?
So there are 3 aspects to the way that I do this course. The first aspect is that I have my pre-recorded digital tutorials that I already have an outline. I give you a PDF outline at the beginning of each week, and it's kind of like a class syllabus. Do this first. And then when you're finished, I encourage people to print out the PDF document, and I encourage them to just check the checkbox that says, I've completed this one. Don't go on to the second tutorial until you finish the first one. And then they just check this off. And all they are is little PDF documents. I created it in Apple's Pages program. All right, so that's all it is, a PDF document that says, go do this, go do this, go do this. And then, so that's the first thing they have. And I say, now, if you have any questions about any of these things, the second part of this is you have direct access to me as your personal coach. And this isn't like a support ticket system or anything like that. I create an online discussion forum. I use Basecamp is what I use. It has a great feature in there that allows us to have these discussions back and forth. It emails you every time, a notification every time there's something that comes up between the two of us. It also allows me at the end of the 4 weeks to quote unquote archive the project, which means that no more questions, no more comments, nothing can be posted after the 4 weeks. But you still have access to everything that did happen during the 4 weeks, and you can still search it and find it years later. So I kind of like that functionality as well as the course provider, because I don't want to have, I promise all of my students, you get unlimited access to me for 4 weeks. But I also promise my students that after the 4 weeks, your access to me is gone. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm very clear about that. It's like, this is what I'm offering. But man, what you're going to get from me for 4 weeks, you're getting a lot of me, more than me than you probably even want. But you're going to get a lot of my attention during 4 weeks. But after the end of the 4 weeks, I don't even want the opportunity for my students to be able to ask another question to have any expectation that I'm going to read that question and potentially answer it after the 4 weeks. After the 4 weeks, I'm out. You're on your own. I'm pushing you out of the nest. Mm-hmm. It's your time to go fly. And that's the expectation in the very beginning. So part one, you get the tutorials. Part two, you get 4 weeks. And here's what I say. And I have people all around the world in every time zone that have gone through this course. And so you can post your question 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And what I promise you is that there is no limit on the number. Currently, there is no limit on the number of questions you can ask. And I say that only because in the last 3 different sessions that I've done, I did have one student in each session that was just very aggressive with the number of questions. I had one student that was asking like 25 questions a day.
Wow.
And I am not kidding you, 25 questions every day.
Wow.
Every day. And here's what I made a commitment. I said, I will answer every question you post, guaranteed. And the person who asked 25 questions a day every day for 4 weeks, I answered every single one of them because that was my commitment. Now, here's the good news. I've been doing this since March of 2011. I just finished my 25th time doing the session. And Travis, the reason why I'm able to answer 25 questions a day is because there's a good chance that with the 596 or 561 students that have gone through this course, there's a chance that it's very unlikely that you're going to come up with a question that I haven't already answered. And so I have a knowledge base where, Travis, if you were to ask me a question about, Cliff, what should I buy a MDX compressor limiter gate like you have in your studio? What does it do, and what benefit would it add for me? Now, I'm not going to respond to you and say, Travis, you asked this question, here's my answer. Instead, I'm going, if this is a question I've never been asked before, I'm going to say, so I'm creating this brief tutorial to answer a question that comes up quite often. Maybe you're thinking about getting an MDX 4600 and you would like to know why I have it, what usefulness is it, and what benefit might it be to you. And so what I'm doing is I'm creating this. I'm literally answering your exact question, but I'm anticipating that 500 people are going to ask this question in the next 4 years. And I'm going to, and so those 25 questions, 23 of the 25 questions are simply me copying and pasting links to YouTube videos or using Text Expander on Mac, which is a program that allows me to pre-write written answers, and all I have to do is type in A to Z MDX 4600, and boom, you get 7 paragraphs of my answer. And the interesting thing is every now and then, I do need to customize it. And with Text Expander, I can paste it, and then I just switch out a couple of the paragraphs or sentences here and there to customize that answer to your response. So you get direct access to me. And the third thing that I offer to my students is 4 weekly group coaching calls. Now, you already get unlimited oh, by the way, just so anybody knows, the way that I do my answers, I only answer questions, and this is something new within the last 3 years. I used to answer questions any time of the day, every day of the week, 7 days a week. But in the last couple years, I've actually started off and say, what should you expect from me? Number one, you can expect that I will answer every question you post during the 4 weeks. But, and you can ask those 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But I will only answer questions between Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So just know that if you ask any questions on the weekend, depending on how many questions there are, it may be Monday afternoon before you get an answer because I'm going to have so many questions to answer on Monday. But I promise you, I will not go to sleep on Monday night until I answer everything that came in before Monday at 5 p.m. That's my commitment to you guys. So that's a little bit. And so the third thing, the third element of my thing is these weekly group coaching calls, which I do via GoToWebinar. I invite all of my students to come on Friday afternoons at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And basically, I don't have anything prepared ahead of time. I just let them type into the question box any question that comes to their mind, any question at all. And I sit in front of my video camera just like this, and I say, Travis has asked this question, and then I answer that. Okay, now Billy has asked this question. Susan just asked this question. And I just Q&A for about an hour, and then at the end of the hour, I wrap it up. And for the students who were not able to participate because they just weren't available at 2 p.m. on Friday, then I take the recording of that, which is in HD. I upload it to my YouTube channel, make it unlisted, and then I publish that afterwards. And I say, hey, everybody, here's the recording of the call just in case you missed it. So
And
those are the 3 elements of my course.
you said, so a couple just random questions. 4 weeks, how did you come up that 4 weeks was the amount of time that the course should be?
Well, it was originally 5 weeks, I believe. I think I did 2 sessions that were 5 weeks, and I realized that 5 weeks was not necessary whatsoever.
Right.
The reason why it's 4 weeks is because of the procrastinators, the people who put things off. The reality is that if you follow my outline, the course outlines exactly like I have it. The reality is that you would actually have your podcast submitted to iTunes by the end of the 3rd week, or even the middle of the 3rd week if you actually are aggressive with my materials. Now, I could do it in 2 weeks, and honestly, if I was still doing one-on-one coaching and consulting, I could actually take somebody who has no recording, no equipment, nothing, and I could actually have them have a podcast in iTunes within 48 hours.
Fair
Personally, one-on-one.
Yeah.
So the thing is the thing is though is that for the person who I'm not doing all of it for them, I am coaching them through the process of doing it themselves. So the first week we're talking about equipment, we're talking about their branding, we're talking about some things. We need some time to gel. They've got to order equipment, wait for it to show up. So there's all of that. Then week 2 is, okay, now let's have you've got the equipment, you've got it hooked up now. Let's have you record something. And then by the end of this week, you should have something recorded and edited. And then 3rd week is let's set up your website, your RSS feed, and let's submit it to iTunes. And those are the 3 logical weekly steps that I think are the most critical and get you up and running. And then week 4 is simply for those people who have life that gets in the way.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is now I have had students with 561 students who have gone through the course. I have had many students who did not launch by the end of the 4 weeks because they had different things come up. But because they have lifetime access to all the tutorials, they have lifetime access to not just the questions they were able to ask, but they can go into that one guy's discussion thread that asked 25 questions a day. They see all of his questions and they see all of my answers to him. Also, they have the recording of all those weekly group coaching calls. And here's the deal. A lot of people say, man, I never would have thought to ask that question. I'm so glad that so-and-so asked that question. Well, there's 4 hours of weekly group coaching calls. And so pretty much every question that could be asked if you were available during the 4 weeks, somebody else has asked that question, and the answer is in my course. And so of all the people who actually gone through my course and didn't launch a podcast by the end of the 4 weeks for whatever reason, every single one of them had launched their podcast within some period of time. In fact, actually 3 people took them 2 years before they launched their podcast. But they're like, Cliff, it's been 2 years and I just launched my show. I couldn't have done it without the continued lifetime access to the materials that you gave. Thank you so much.
Very cool. All right. So the last question I'll ask you second to last question actually, before we do the final question, advertising for the course. What do you do? Obviously, you have an email list and you go on podcast, but is there anything else beyond that you do?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
So I talk. I have my own podcast, and so I talk about it. I promote my podcasting course. I am the sponsor of my podcast. And I create a podcast that I believe is compelling and extremely valuable, life changing to everyone who listens to it. Otherwise, why would they be listening to it? And so, and here's the interesting thing: 85% of the people who listen to my show, they already have a podcast. They learned how to podcast from me. But you know what? I still promote my show or my course every single week to my audience because those are the ones who are out there telling other people. The interesting thing is my clients are podcasters. So anybody who creates a podcast who is a client of mine, they're creating an audience of people. Now, I don't care what the topic is. You might come to me and say, Cliff, I'm really interested in creating a podcast about basket weaving. All right? And their biggest goal in life is to gather 400 subscribers to their basket weaving podcast. I guarantee you, if a podcaster creates a podcast about basket weaving and they have 400 subscribers, at least 2 of those 400 people might think, I wonder if I should create a podcast about something I'm interested in. Mm-hmm. And so that every single client that I have is going to produce potential future clients for me. And if they've been satisfied with what I offer them, then of course they're in my course. And so the place where, mentioning my own course on my podcast is the number one place where people hear about it. My mailing list is number 2. And then I do have an affiliate program for my A to Z course. Only people who can sign up for my affiliate program are people who have gone through the course and paid for it themselves. Those are the only people who can actually earn a commission as a result of promoting this course. And so those people are out there promoting it nonstop. They're like, this is how I learned. This is exactly it. And then the other way that I promote it is we talked a lot about this course, but this isn't the main purpose of this course. I'm doing 25 interviews in 2 weeks. I've done 3 other interviews this morning. Not once did they even ask me anything. I had 3 different interviews this morning. Not one of them asked me, Cliff, what can we promote for you? And you know what? I didn't jump out and say, well, let me talk about my podcasting A to Z course. The only reason this one has come up is because you said, hey, this is one of the main things I want to talk about. And so I think this is awesome. I love it. But here's what I can tell you. In the other ones, they're like, yeah, tell us about how you went from hobby to full-time career. But also, I noticed that you've lost over 100 pounds in the last 19 months. Can you talk about that? And so all I do is I get on and I just share my enthusiasm and my joy and my passion for life and whatever that it is that their target audience is looking for. If I have a connection, I try to share that with great passion and joy. And it's my hope that by hearing my voice, the passion, the way that I communicate, if people just get it's like, you know what, I can just get excited listening to that guy talk because he's so passionate about everything that he believes in, that he's doing. And you know what? My hope is that a percentage of those people might just look me up and say, I'm going to go check out his podcast. And they may have zero interest in creating a podcast right now, but they might hear me over a period of time. And then they say, oh my gosh, he's doing this. Maybe I'm going to sign up for that podcasting A to Z course. And I've had people, Travis, who have told me, Cliff, I have no desire to launch a podcast. Zero desire. But I've been listening to you for 3.5 years. And the things that I've heard from you, the things that I've learned from you, the way that you've inspired me, the value that I've received is so far greater than $2,000. I decided to go ahead and sign up for your course just so I could actually connect with you for 4 weeks. I've literally had people do that.
Wow, that is awesome. I know we're running out of time here, so I want to wrap up. My last question, you can keep this as brief as you want, is so this podcast is geared to the 20-somethings out there. Do you have any advice if you could go back in time to your 20-year-old self, or maybe you have a cousin who's in their 20s, general advice for someone in their 20s that you could give?
Yes, absolutely. Especially for those who might be thinking about finding work that they love, creating an online business, or pursuing any of this stuff. My number one piece of advice, go for it. But do this. Work out every single day, 6 days a week for the rest of your life. Seriously, get into the gym, get over yourself. Don't go take care of yourself physically. It is the most important. If you take care of yourself physically, get into the gym every single day, whether it's 10 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, 45 minutes a day, or even more. Go to the gym every single day and work out, and I promise you, every area of your life will be better as a result of it.
Huh, that's great advice, and that's something I've never gotten. 70+ episodes, and it's so basic and smart and great. Cliff, thank you so. Oh, go ahead.
Let me if you, because I think this one will drive it home. A lot of people just heard me and it's like, whatever. That's really great advice. I want to encourage people, go to podcastanswerman.com/fitness. podcastanswerman.com/fitness. And I want to show you, if you go there, you're going to see pictures of what I look like when I started my fitness journey and what happened to me as the result of pursuing a business, trying to get it up and running, working around the clock, and neglecting and sacrificing things like my physical health. I was absolutely a walking time bomb. My body was. And today, 19 months after working out 6 days a week every week, and I plan on working out 6 days a week every week for the rest of my life, 19 months later, I've burned over 100 pounds of fat. I've added 26.5 pounds of muscle, and I'm not done yet.
Wow. That is really inspiring. Cliff, thank you so much for coming on the show. Obviously, everybody listening, check out Podcast Answer Man. Check out the podcast, the website, Cliff's fitness journey. Cliff, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Travis. It's been an honor, my friend.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. And if you did, make sure you hit the big red subscribe button down below. You can also check me out on Facebook and on Twitter. And I release a new video every Monday. And by hitting that subscribe button, you'll get those new videos every Monday. And this is really a podcast. It's also a website. You can check out the website. It's howtodoyour20s.com. I'll put a link right over here as well. And what it's all about is trying to improve your life. And we specifically focus on things that people in their 20s are interested in. So make sure you like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, whatever. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again on another video.